Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. The three adult occupants of the lighthouse on Flannan Isles were different to the rest of the wizards and witches listening to the Quidditch World Cup final live broadcast, and not just because the wizarding wireless set they were listening to had been stolen. They neither cared which teams were playing, what moves the players tried, or even who won. All they were interested in was at what time the match would finish. When the Bulgarian seeker caught the snitch, they cared not a jot about the score. Their eyes were instead fixed on the clock on the wall. Perfect. Had the game gone on into the night, we may have had to change our plans. We will give it some time for their celebrations to really get underway before we spoil their party. Bella had been sitting nursing little Marvolo and now rose to put their growing boy into his crib. Augustus followed her through and stood with his arms around Bella as she settled their son down for the night. "Don't worry, my big strong wizard. Your little Bella has been looking forward to tonight." "I know, love. I just wish I was coming with you." She turned around and kissed her mate. "I'm glad you're not coming. I'll be able to concentrate on killing as many of these bastards as I can. I know my big strong wizard will be safe and able to come back here to look after our beautiful baby." Our baby boy agrees with his father. "We both need you back here too." This earned Augustus another passionate kiss before his now rather breathless mate made him a promise. "I'll be back. And then my big strong wizard is going to take care of his little witch all night. We might even make a brother or sister for Marvolo." A few more kisses and it was time to go. Augustus had a job to do. While he would be worried about Bella, his mate was right. His mission wasn't really dangerous and should see him return safely to their son. Molly was rattling about in the empty house. She supposed the emptiness felt more pronounced tonight because the burrow had been full to bursting before her entire family had headed off to the Quidditch match. She had listened to the game on the wizarding wireless, more interested in the match passing off without any trouble than the fact that Ireland won. The silence of the house was shattered though by the alarm that signaled the burrow's wards were under attack. Thanking every deity that she could think of for her children not being present, Molly flung some flu powder into the fire and was somewhat surprised when it turned green. She'd expected the fire to stay red, blocking the family's escape from the attack. Glancing to the family clock just confused her. Even more, her hand on the clock was pointing unerringly to home. If the burrow was under attack, it should be indicating she was in mortal peril. Something wasn't quite right here. Molly attempted to disapparate up to her bedroom and accomplished that feat. Looking out the first-floor window again confused her as it showed no visible threats. What she did see seconds later though made her heart soar with relief and joy. A squad of goblin warriors had just portkeyed into their front garden with weapons drawn. Molly made her way downstairs to greet her very welcome visitors. She grabbed her clock before walking out the front door. The squad commander knew how important this family was to the nation. He had warriors checking the ward's perimeter as he approached the head female of the family. "Ma'am, the wards around your home were certainly attacked. We can find no trace of any attackers though. The flows still worked and there were no anti-apparition wards raised. It seems so strange. Even my family clock didn't show any danger." As Molly showed the squad commander her clock, she almost dropped it from fright. Every member of her family, bar her, saw their hands on the clock swing to indicate mortal peril. As Molly emitted a sound that was part scream, part moan, the squad commander was busy shouting orders to his warriors. At Gringotts too, there was a decision to be made. Why would anyone attack the Lovegood property when they are with Centurion Crow and his family on his island? 2 attacks in such a short space of time had never happened before. The knowledge of the other event that had them already on high alert tonight saw the commander quickly reach a decision. If he was wrong, then no lives should be lost. There was already a squad at the Weasleys and Gringotts knew for certain the Lovegoods were out of the country. "Take every warrior we can muster and head for the stadium. I think they are trying to tie our forces up elsewhere by attacking warded properties. I want to hear from those warriors who went to the Weasleys as quickly as possible." At that, a warrior raced into the control center to report as ordered. "Commander, we found no sign of attackers at the Weasleys. The female had a device which suddenly displayed all her family in mortal peril. The squad commander left 2 warriors with her on protection detail and sent me here to report. He took the rest of the squad to the stadium. This just confirmed the commander's thoughts. Well done, warrior. Follow the centurion here and you may yet see battle tonight. I need to inform the director about this. Bella had just cast the dark mark for the first time in over a decade. She then unleashed a barrage of spells against the unsuspecting revelers before apparating to her next position. This was the signal for their master to awaken his warriors before he too began unleashing spells. It was then Bella's turn to open fire before apparating to her final position. Tonight wasn't about how many her spells killed, it was more about causing panic and herding the sheep where they wanted them to go. Right into the biggest concentration of inferi, she fired her last set of spells, portkeying out of there just as the pops of apparition announced she had company. Bella was heading back to their lighthouse knowing their master would be mere minutes behind. She jumped into her mate's arms the second she arrived, relieved to see his attacks against the wards had been as uneventful as they thought they would be. Their hit-and-run tactics had worked well tonight. Now all they needed was for the inferi to do their work. Fred pulled Ron away from the now advancing inferiors, while the others started firing spells at it. They were having little effect though, causing Roger to call for a change of tactics. It's already dead, so we need to hit it with flame, cutting or blasting curses. Fire together on 3. Ginny couldn't wait that long. She shouted 3 and fired the most powerful blasting curse she could at its head. The 5 boys all seemed to choose the same spell as Ginny and the effect on the inferiors was instantaneous. It was blasted apart. That didn't seem too bad. Ron was desperately trying to reassure himself, having been literally scared stiff a moment ago. Fred decided to help his younger brother get over his shakes. Only because you gave us a warning, Ron? Well done. Fred's right. We could bring it down, because we could see it. I don't really want to enter those trees to get to the stadium though. Cedric's point was well received. No one wanted to play hide and seek with any more of these things. The curses and explosions around the campsites seemed to have stopped too. All the screaming was now coming from amongst the trees. All 6 thought that was another absolutely excellent reason not to enter those trees. Where's the order of the Avs, with those lovely swords when you need them? George's comment also gave him an idea. He was a wizard after all. He approached the edge of the trees and lifted a fallen branch, a branch that was soon transfigured into a razor-sharp axe. He actually felt better having a physical weapon in one hand and his wand in the other. That was until a dead hand clamped onto the back of his neck. He was spun around and the hand's partner seized his throat. Those 10 cold digits appeared determined to meet in the middle of George Weasley's neck. There was also a gaping mouth to deal with, a festering mouth that was doing its best to take a chunk out of him. George found the axe was trapped between his chest and this living nightmare, giving him no leverage at all. He did manage to shove the blade up and into its throat, allowing George to at least try and push that terrible mouth away from his face. His vision was blacking out though from lack of air when a tremendous pain cleared his focus. This thing had got a grip with its teeth and was trying to chew his ear off. The two were so close and struggling so much that none of the others could get a curse off. They had learned their curses needed to be powerful to be of any use against these inferiors, and the risk of hitting George instead with a reducto was just too great. Fred couldn't stand back any longer and with a wild yell, leapt on the creature to physically attack it. This crazy move saw the 3 of them bundled to the ground, the big bonus being the inferiors found itself being violently pushed onto the axe blade. That sharp blade sliced through the undead creature's neck and removed its head from its body. As the head flopped from its neck, those teeth were still clamped shut to George's ear. That was until Ginny stepped forward and, with a yell as wild as Fred's, kicked out at that head as hard as she could. It may have taken part of her brother's ear with it, but that disgusting and dismembered head sailed back into the trees. Fred dragged the now headless body off his twin, before seizing the axe out of George's hands. The thing that had dared to attack his twin would never move again by the time Ginny managed to pull a berserk Fred away. He had hacked the already dead body to bits. Ron practically dragged a choking George back into the little clearing in front of the tents while Cedric and Roger continually scanned the area for any more of these things. As Ginny then led Fred back to their little group, it was the Ravenclaw, Roger, who began levitating anything he could get his wand on to start forming a barrier. Fallen logs, rocks, anything at all was soon being transformed into thick twisted brambles with wicked thorns. We don't want to give them any cover, just slow the bastards down. They won't be able to sneak up on us using this, just get trapped so we can blast them to bits. Cedric was soon helping Roger with this task, while Ginny and Ron kept their eyes peeled, ready to shout out a warning and open fire. Fred was down on the ground beside his injured twin, a blanket quickly snatched from the tent helping to lessen George's shaking. While George's right ear was a bloody mess, his throat was also bruised and swollen, making speaking difficult. He still tried though and, in typical Weasley twin fashion, attempted to make a joke out of what had just happened. "Looks like Mum will be able to tell us apart now. Well, since the only one I allow to chew my ear is Angelina, that's just gonna have to be the case from now on. Wait until I tell Angelina that one. I might tell her myself after tonight." "I know exactly what you mean, brother mine. Go and help the guys. Just leave me my axe. At least we know that works against the ugly bastards." Fred left George lying in the middle of an area that was now surrounded by the wickedest-looking brambles he'd ever laid eyes on. He helped the other four patrol what was now their safe zone, all of them mentally trying to drown out the screams that were still coming from deeper in the woods. That first Inferius had actually done them a tremendous favor. Without their group almost running into it, they would have raced into the middle of what sounded like a war zone. Draco was right in the middle of what felt like a war zone. He'd been overjoyed when Harry got him tickets, now he was wishing he was still lying on that beach beside Pansy. The free tickets saw Blaze's father accompanying Draco, Blaze and Theo to the final. Harry even loaned them a tent. All had been having a wonderful time until the dark mark appeared in the sky, and the curses started killing people. Draco knew at once who would be behind this, and also what fate awaited him if Voldemort or his crazy aunt got their wands on him. They had been one of the first groups to react and head for the safety of the stadium. The stadium may be safe, but the route to it was proving deadly. Running the gauntlet through an army of Inferi would certainly result in the ranks of the dead being swollen tonight. A dark wood full of Inferi would easily be Draco's Bogart memory from now until the day he died. He certainly never wanted to be part of anything worse than this. He had seen people snatched as they were running, their family and friends struggling to cast any spells for fear of hitting the person grabbed. Sometimes there were enough people there to overpower the creature, and sometimes the creatures were the ones doing the overpowering. The auras had been on the scene pretty quickly, but initially had to stop scared witches and witches firing off flame curses at every shadow. After a long hot summer, the woods were tinder dry, and their aim was anything but true. These wild flame curses were doing more damage than help in this close-quarters battle. Their time working with the Marauders had never been more welcome. The information they had been teaching students soon kicked in and provided the tactics they needed for their group to survive. Finding a small thicket of trees suitable for their purpose, they quickly established a defensible position. They had tried to coax others to do the same, but they were too busy racing headlong into trouble. Frightened people were so desperate to escape from the perceived threat behind them, they blundered straight into the waiting arms of the Inferi. Other than stun people into submission, there was really nothing more they could do. Who was going to listen to a bunch of kids when they were under attack from Voldemort? Having watched his son teaching tactics to the younger Hogwarts students at the fair, Blaze's father was happy to go along with their ideas and had his wand ready to defend their position if needed. They would pick off any Inferius that came within range, but could only convince one family, whose son was in the defense club Draco helped teach, to join them amongst their little tree fort. It was only the arrival of the goblins that the battle swung in their favor. The auras were then able to concentrate solely on escorting everyone to the safety of the warded stadium, while the goblins took over the hunt for the Inferi. There were some angry warriors in those woods. They hunted the Inferi the way a poacher goes after game. For all the terror these undead horrors had brought to the magical people running around in the dark woods, the warriors might well have been picking off rabbits on the village green. No Inferi stood a chance against those flashing blades. They were being systematically hunted down before being hacked to pieces. When more reinforcements arrived from Gringotts, The warriors set up a skirmishing line and swept the woods clean. Auras and healers were close behind to provide light for the warriors to work with, and aid for any wounded. Only when the reinforcements reached them did Draco and Blaze have their group stand down from the little thicket of trees. Their small fort had provided a defensible position and shelter from the carnage they had witnessed taking place all around them. Their group began to make its way to the safety of the stadium, picking their route through the now swept woods. Not one of them, though, put their wand away. Bill and Percy were combing through the survivors looking for the rest of their family. Their father, Amos, and Charlie were searching in the other direction. A Patronus message would be sent the instant one of them found the 6 teens. Spotting the director, Bill still at least retained the sense to drop his conjured sword on the grass before approaching. "Well met, Assistant Ambassador. You look as if you've been administering some goblin diplomacy to these abominations in the woods tonight." He had no idea how haggard his appearance was, nor did he care. All Bill wanted was to end the horrible visions of those undead bodies feasting on his family. The only way to do that was to see his brothers and sister with his own eyes. A Patronus message from his father saying they were fine would certainly take the edge off, though. "Forgive me, Director. I'm not exactly at my best right now. I left half a dozen Hogwarts students to make their way from the campsite to the stadium and am worried sick about them. I was wondering if you had heard anything." Ragnar could clearly see the anguish making that decision was causing this fine young wizard. If anything happened to that group, it could easily break both father and son, a father and son who were very important to the nation. "I shall assign warriors to search for them." The goblin leader was cut off by a loud shout and a little redhead moving at speed, crying her eldest brother's name. Ginny slammed straight into Bill, her desperate hug, accompanied by a question. "Where's Dad, Charlie, and Amos?" The sense of relief Bill felt holding his sister and seeing his brothers were alive rendered him speechless for the moment. It was left to Percy to answer Ginny's question. "They're all okay and currently searching for you lot." "George, what happened to you?" "One of those things tried to give me a love bite. I need all of you lot to convince Alasure. I tried to fight it off. Can't have my girl getting jealous." The squad leader who had found the group of teens made his report directly to Ragnar. Bill had yet to speak or released his hold on Ginny. "Director, the Assistant Ambassador has taught them well. They stayed in a clearing and erected a barrier around their group, creating a most effective defensive shield and killing ground. They had permanently downed 4 of the undead by the time we got there. Percy sent off his Patronus, informing the others that all was safe and they would meet at the first aid tent. Bill had snapped out of his funk enough to thank everyone involved for rescuing his family. The squad commander wouldn't hear of it, though. They didn't need rescuing, Assistant Ambassador, just to be told it was now safe to leave their defenses. They used their heads and fought like warriors. Ragnar had her word for Bill before he left. There were protected houses around Ottery Catchpole, where the wards were attacked tonight. First on that list was the Weasley property. We're now sure it was merely a ruse to keep our forces away from here, rather than a serious attempt to breach our wards. Your mother has a warrior protection detail, and also a device that indicated you were all in mortal peril. You should contact your mother as quickly as possible to let her know her family is safe." The first aid tent held 20 beds but was clearly swamped. George was regarded as walking wounded, so took a seat outside. Even within the few minutes they had been here, all could see that George's injury was minor compared to some that were being carried in. One thing not in short supply was healers. Amelia's contingency plan swinging into action as soon as the alarm was raised. The healer was working on George just before Arthur managed to get there. While the family reunions were taking place all around them, the healer had some bad news for George. While healing his neck was the work of a few minutes, his ear was an entirely different matter. Injuries caused by dark magic are notoriously difficult to treat, and magic doesn't come much darker than in fairy. I need to clean the wound up to prevent the danger of infection. Unfortunately, I can't repair the damage or regrow what you've lost. You are going to have part of your ear missing for the rest of your life. Having watched as people were carried in with chunks of their face missing, George wasn't about to complain. After hearing about the supposed attack on the burrow, Arthur knew his wife would be going spare. Even although Molly's family clock would be telling her they were now out of danger, Arthur was well aware she wouldn't believe that until they returned home. Arthur made a portkey to the burrow, right at the front gate so as not to surprise the guards now posted there. Charlie was going to take all the younger ones home. Cedric and Roger would be able to use the flue at the burrow to get to where they wanted to go. Percy decided to stay and help Bill. The goblin involvement guaranteed there would be work for them to do. With a final hug of his 4 youngest, Arthur stood back and watched Charlie take them home. He and Amos would certainly have work to do now too. Amelia was suffering from a tiredness that seeped all the way through to her very bones. No pun intended. Her anger though would keep her going for a few more hours yet. It would need to. They had taken over one of the hospitality suites at the stadium to hold this meeting. None of those attending were feeling very hospitable though. Both the Irish and Bulgarian ministers were here, with representatives from their ministries too. She could see some of the Bulgarians looking down their noses at Ragnarok, and a hastily summoned Barchoke. She decided to nip that in the bud from the off. Can I start by offering our appreciation to our goblin friends? While my auras would certainly have prevailed in the end, their methods and expertise at swiftly dispatching the inferior saved many lives. One of the Bulgarian party asked rather aggressively how the goblins knew to respond, since he was unaware of any call for assistance being sent out. Amelia was just about to demand he explain himself when Barchoke prevented an international incident kicking off. Tempers were understandably frayed in here tonight. While we had warriors on high alert in the event an attack was made on the stadium wards, Gringotts still monitors and protects many places the length and breadth of Britain. We got our first alarm when the Weasley residence was attacked. This was news to most of the people there. Even Amelia hadn't heard the full story. When the Lovegood residence was next to be attacked, the controller on duty was naturally suspicious. He knew the Lovegoods were currently holidaying with my family on a tropical island, and suspected a ruse to keep our forces busy. That ruse would only be necessary if the attackers were going after a bigger target. He gambled on sending warriors to protect the fans at the stadium. Ambassador Weasley's wife has a wonderful family heirloom that shows the condition of her family. It showed they were in danger. When the warriors sent to protect the Weasley family found no actual attack, the squad commander left a few guards before heading for the stadium where the rest of the family were in danger. Barchoke then turned his attention directly to Amos. The third property under our protection in Ottery St. Catchpole was then attacked. Though we sent a small squad, the chief warlock's wife was startled but in no danger. I believe she flew to the burrow to await news with Mrs. Weasley. Again, Amelia offered her thanks before continuing with her briefing. This whole attack reeks of a well-organized plan. They seemed to know where the wards ended, and placed the inferi outside the ward boundaries. The dark mark in the sky and curses firing into the campsite got the fans moving. As everyone knows, there was a grassy avenue either side of the small woods. These avenues were the next targets. People were being hit with killing curses out in the open. They would naturally seek shelter in the woods. That's where the vast majority of the inferi were waiting. How could this be set up right under your noses? Amelia didn't get angry at what was a fair question. She was saving that anger for someone who deserved it. Voldemort obviously got a lot more information out of poor Bertha than they were led to believe. Led to believe by that lying fucking toad. Umbridge, we have been on site for the last month, and this entire area including those woods was swept for threats daily. We can only assume that the inferi were already buried in place before then, and being already dead they wouldn't register as a threat until they became active. All were beginning to see just how well this plan had been executed. Privately, the Irish and Bulgarian midwives were thinking they wouldn't have dealt with the situation any better. The big question still had to be asked though. What are the casualty figures? Amelia's head was bowed as she gave out the horrific news. The number of dead is approaching 100, and that figure is expected to rise still. Wizard, witch, child, British, Irish, Bulgarian, the inferi didn't discriminate. We lost about 7 people to curses from the Death Eaters. The inferi accounted for the rest. We have quite a few seriously wounded too. A very bad night for all of us. No one there disagreed with that assessment. It would soon be daylight though, and then the real cleanup operation would begin. Cornelius intended to call a meeting of the Wizengamot for 3 o'clock in the afternoon to inform them of what happened. He invited their Irish, Bulgarian and Goblin friends to attend. Cornelius had learned the truth about these events usually got out. It was better if everyone learned the facts at the same time. With the Maldives being 5 hours ahead of the UK, it was already approaching noon local time when Barchok and the two Slytherins appeared. Draco was scheduled to return later on today, and Blaise had jumped at the chance of beginning to put last night's horror behind him. He couldn't think of a better method of starting to do that than lying on a tropical beach with Parvati surrounded by their friends. It was certainly weird to be sitting in this beautiful setting and describing the horrific happenings of last night. Dan had asked the first question. For the benefit of us dentists here, could someone tell me what these inferi are? His daughter was really the only one with the combined knowledge to describe these creatures to a couple of muggles. Dad, think zombies and you won't be too far away. What? Are we talking Night of the Living Dead here, real flesh-eating zombies? Staying with the Grangers had seen Barchok develop a taste for tea. The goblin was sipping a cup of that wonderful brew at the moment while trying to answer people he now considered family. I don't know what a zombie is, Dan, but an inferius is an animated corpse that will claw and bite at its victim until they are dead. I saw George Weasley with part of an ear missing, and he was certainly one of the lucky ones. This analogy met with Draco's agreement. The Slytherin found himself shivering in the tropical heat as he spoke about last night. We could certainly have used you four and those blades of yours last night. Perhaps people would have listened to you. They ignored us and just kept running into more danger. We tried coaxing, ordering, even screaming at them. Nothing worked. The auras were trying to keep people safe and fight the inferi at the same time. The arrival of the warriors really changed things for the better. Their blades chopped the inferi into pieces like we would use practice dummies. It was awesome to watch. Alice and Frank had been auras in the last war and were well aware of what an inferius was. You could slaughter them by the dozen with flame curses if they were advancing across open ground. Facing them in a wood at night was an entirely different matter. It was Alice, though, who voiced their thoughts about something that had yet to be mentioned. I'm struggling to see what Voldemort gains from this. Yes, his plan has killed a lot of people, and yes, it's also an embarrassment to the Ministry. Apart from reminding people he's still around, I can't see what else he gains from this. Don't ask me to explain it, but this feels so much more than just a grand gesture to prove he's still an evil, murdering bastard. This drew Barchok's first smile since he'd been summoned from this island to return to Britain. Your aura instincts are still keen, Alice. We at Gringotts are thinking the very same. This was not an obvious attack on Harry. Anyone who knows him could tell you his only interest in Quidditch is when Hermione wears a Harpies jersey. Whatever it is, we need to return home. No. Harry looked at his father with a bit of shock, not used to having his suggestions so abruptly shouted down. Do you expect me to sit here in safety while people in Britain are suffering from this attack? Centurion Crow, I expect you to follow orders. The director has ordered you to remain here until we can discover just what Riddle is up to. You yourself have said more than once, this is the safest place to be. You will be staying here until we get a lot more information. I realize this is not what you wanted to hear, son, but that's the way it has to be. At least until we discover just what Voldemort's plan is. Every profile we have on him indicates that won't be long. After that we can begin to make plans of our own. His father was right. Harry was not happy with that news. They had only planned on being here for another 4 days anyway, before heading back to Kinussie on Saturday. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross on Monday, but they were all ready and prepared for that. They had stormed Diagon Alley with 3 sets of Potter Scholarship students. Delighted to see the place getting back on its feet. Fortescue had actually reserved all his front tables for them when it became known they were in the alley. After the amount of business he did at the fair, he thought it was only fitting. Ewan was hyper-excited to tell them about his new house. A house that was only a 10-minute ride on his bicycle from Natalie's. Jenny had confirmed that had sealed her decision on what university to choose. Being able to live so close to the McDonalds, Roy and Mary appeared delighted to be able to take the young Abercrombie family under their wings. Almost as delighted as Jenny and Ewan were to be sheltering there. Harry's idea of the Potter scholarships becoming like family was now paying unexpected bonuses. With all their business in Britain already taken care of, there really was no other pressing reason to race home. With the director ordering him to stay here, he simply didn't have any other option. Looking around at his friends and family, his eyes lingering on babies Jamie and Astrid, Harry actually smiled. All in all, there were worse places to be stuck than here in this company. Dolores would have loved to have such an option. She was currently stuck between a rock and a hard place. An enraged Minister of Magic was loudly tearing strips off her and Ludo. You two sat there and told me that poor Bertha only knew general details, and that everything would be publicized anyway. Was knowing exactly where the wards would extend to general details. Did I miss that the campsite for the event would be on a muggle's farm being publicized? These bastards knew every little detail, and must have set this whole thing up at least by the start of summer. Cornelius, old chap, can I just say in my defense, I didn't actually know any of those facts. And you think that excuses you, Ludo? You're supposed to be a head of department. Not only should you know all those details, you should have been involved in determining every single one of them. A wizard can't spread himself too thin. It was Amelia who interrupted Ludo this time. Funny you should say that. My information tells me that's exactly what you've done. She might have used the word funny, but there was absolutely no mirth coming from Amelia. You took a load of bets on the outcome of the final. Bets you can't cover. Who says I can't cover them? Oh, so you do have the 20,000 galleons, Ambassador Barchoke says you owe to citizens of the nation. He was instantly dismissive of that argument. What? You're worried about gambling debts with goblins? I would have thought you had more to deal with at the moment than that, Amelia. Ludo suddenly had a face full of a very angry witch. I have far more important things to deal with, but here's our problem. You, however strange it might seem, are a department head at the Ministry of Magic. Your behavior, while you hold that position, not only reflects on the rest of us, it's held up as an example of how the ministry carries out its business too. They bet on Crumb catching the snitch, but Ireland winning the game. It was a mug's bet. I covered as many of them as I could get my hands on. It was Amos who interrupted this time. Amelia looked ready to draw her wand and begin cursing this fool. Since I'm not a gambler, excuse me here if I'm pointing out the blindingly obvious. How can that be a mug's bet? Wasn't that the actual result of the match? Exactly. What fool of a seeker would catch the snitch when it meant their team would lose? The smug look on Ludo's face was like a red rag to Cornelius's temper. Enough. Exactly how much do you owe? Well, I got lucky when a few wizards I owed gold to didn't make it out of those woods. Amos found himself having to physically place his body between Amelia and Ludo. She appeared angry enough to tear the cretin apart with her bare hands. Cornelius didn't miss though. The Minister of Magic had Ludo in his sights. Ludo, you will give Amelia all the details of those you owe gold from betting on the outcome of the final. The ministry will honor those bets. Why, thank you, Cornelius. Pretty decent of you, old chap. Once you have given Amelia those details, you will make your way to my office, where I will accept your letter of resignation. This shocked the former Quidditch player. Why in the name of Merlin would I do that? Because if you don't, I will sack you and then hand you over to the goblins, so they can extract what you owe them. Ludo was trying to be confident. He certainly didn't feel so. The Wizengamot would never stand for a wizard being handed over to the goblins. If you resign, I will inform the Wizengamot that you were in no way responsible for last night's disaster. You felt since you were the wizard in charge, your honor dictated you had to go. Should you fight me on this, I'm sure we could at least make a charge of gross negligence stick. Since that negligence led to about 100 deaths, I feel sure the Wizengamot would see you placed in Azkaban for a considerable time. Cornelius glanced at the clock before continuing. I address the Wizengamot in 45 minutes. If I haven't received your resignation by then, I will be asking Amelia to have you arrested. Either way, your tenure in the Ministry of Magic ends now. Get out. Ludo was speechless. How had this happened? He glanced around the room and saw no help forthcoming. Even Dolores was keeping her head down. It would appear it was time for him to leave. As the door closed behind Ludo, Cornelius turned his attention to Dolores. Your career is hanging by a thread, Dolores. Lie to me and you will follow Ludo out of here. Would it be safe to assume Voldemort knows every fucking detail of this tournament? No one had ever seen Cornelius Fudge this angry. Few knew he could even get like this. Dolores could only nod, her voice having deserted in the face of this unparalleled fury. Both Fudge's fists slammed into the table, making her almost jump out her seat. If we didn't need this tournament to be a success in order to help heal relations between us and the Bulgarians, the event would be cancelled, and your ass would be following Ludo's out that door, and straight out the ministry too. He then proceeded to tell her how things were going to be from now on. You will start working on changes at once, and you will be based at Hogwarts for the duration of the event. The entire tournament had better run as smooth as silk or you will be out of a job. Your entire career is now riding on this. Do a good job or else. Do a great job. Well, a vacancy just opened up. I know you're going to be busy, so we won't keep you any longer. Dolores shot out of there as if her robes were on fire. Cornelius's ire was so hot they just might be. The minister was sitting rubbing his temples as Amelia asked him a simple question. Would you really make her a head of department? Carrot and stick, Amelia. If she makes this tournament into the amazing success we need, I just might. I don't really have time to replace her at the moment. I'm open to suggestions though to who we have in reserve, if we're forced to give Dolores the chop. Those suggestions would have to wait until after the Wizengamot meeting. Thankfully, Ludo's letter of resignation arrived 5 minutes before the meeting started. Amelia had a large map of the area which she was using very effectively to tell the story of exactly what had happened after the cup final to all in the Wizengamot chamber. It clearly showed the stadium and the landscape of the Muggle farmers' fields that had been used as the official campsite. The oral debriefings had given Amelia a very clear picture of what had actually happened. Her job now was to pass that knowledge on to the chamber. Both Voldemort and Lestrange were seen firing curses last night, leaving us to believe Rookwood's task was to trigger the ward alarms and keep the warriors busy. She pointed her wand to the map and the first attack was indicated. The dark mark was raised and 3 curses were fired into the camp, before Lestrange disapparated away. Voldemort then opened fire from here 4 curses later, and then he too moved. Steadily flicking her wand brought up the progression of the attack sites, as they kept moving position after firing a few spells. In the calm light of day, all could clearly see these attacks were designed to push panicked witches and wizards into the woods, where the Inferi waited. You didn't have to be a genius to understand how that would unfold, with the biggest loss of life magical Britain had ever suffered in a single attack. My auras were trying to fight a close quarters battle with Inferi while also trying to get people safely out of those woods. A task that was made a lot easier when our goblin friends arrived. Amelia stopped mid-sentence because of another type of arrival. A crow had somehow made its way into the chamber. It headed for the minister, but she was pleased to see her auras managed to bring the bird down before it could reach Cornelius. The letter tied to its leg was very carefully scanned before being handed to its intended recipient. Minister Cornelius Fudge was written across the envelope. The chamber was totally silent as Cornelius read the letter, all noticing the color draining from his complexion as he did so. It was a clearly shaken minister who stood to address the chamber. The bottom of the letter claiming that talkies were being sent to others too. The Daily Prophet amongst them left him no choice. He had no reason to believe that threat was a bluff, so the Wizengamot and their guests were better hearing this news from him. I have just received a message from the criminal who carried out last night's atrocities. I think it's only fair you get to hear what this madman says. Cornelius then read out the letter to a captivated audience. Last night was something that should never have happened. I certainly didn't want to do it. Every drop of magical blood spilled is a waste and a loss. I was simply left with no choice but to react to these repeated attacks against me and my beliefs. Our country has embraced views that are so dangerous they will end a way of life. I'm prepared to fight to the death to protect. In order to return the balance that has been lost, I am offering this simple solution. Kill Harry Potter and I will leave Britain for good, safe in the knowledge that Santa heads will then see our beloved country once more in the right hands. While Harry Potter lives, I will continue to wage war on an unjust Britain. Since he hides himself behind wards like the coward he is, I will simply have to wage my war the best way I can. The responsible witches and wizards of Britain must ask themselves this question. What is one life when you could save so many unnecessary deaths? I await your answer, Lord Voldemort. The chamber was now in an uproar. And not just because Fudge said the scary name out loud. This was easily Harry's favorite time of the day. He actually didn't know how he was going to survive in Hogwarts without it. He was now as addicted to this as he was to Hermione's hugs. They'd done their morning exercises, dueling practice too. After a shower and breakfast, Harry was sitting with a baby in his arms. Today it was Jamie. His name might be James, but the family called him Jamie. This actually appealed to Harry rather than having him as a constant reminder of a man he couldn't remember. Funnily enough, as the little tyke gripped Harry's pinky firmly with his tiny fist, he'd never felt closer to his parents than he did right now. Not that Jamie looked anything like a Potter. His brown eyes and wisps of the same colored hair clearly identified him as the son of Dan and Emma Granger. It was more the feelings his baby brother stirred somewhere deep inside him. Harry already knew he would do anything to keep his brother and his goddaughters safe. His mum and dad had given their very lives to ensure he had a chance at life. He was certainly their son. Harry was positive he wouldn't hesitate to do the same for the baby currently in his arms, or the little blonde baby girl who competed with Jamie for his attention. At least he would get to see Astrid at Hogwarts. It was going to be really hard being away from his baby brother. Hermione was trying to console both of them by saying that they would be finished Hogwarts before their brother was too. He suspected Hermione was feeling the same as him, and that her efforts to be cheery weren't really doing her any good either. He certainly understood Jenny Abercrombie's decision to choose a university close to someone she knew. Harry was already sure access to Jamie would figure in the decision he and Hermione made after leaving Hogwarts. He was trying not to think of the mayhem Voldemort had caused back in Britain. Jamie clasping his little finger was actually helping with that. Harry found it impossible to maintain his anger with this tiny person snuggled into the crook of his arm. He would just have to save that anger for when he could use it. A direct order from Ragnarok meant Harry couldn't go near Britain at the moment anyway. Betsy popped onto the porch at the front of the beach chalet, carrying a sheathed sword in each hand. Master and Mistress has visitors. There is no time to dress properly, but you will need these. Emma took Jamie as her teenage children strapped on their swords. Surely you won't need them on the island. Harry had now spotted the visitors, and understood why Betsy had appeared. The director is visiting, so we be to wear our swords. They don't exactly match our shorts and t-shirts though. With Hermione on his arm they headed off to meet the rather large party of guests Father had brought to the island. At least they knew all but 2 of the 10 people he'd arrived with. The young couple bowed to Ragnarok before Harry spoke, deliberately using English, because of their guests. Well met, Director. You do me great honor by visiting my island home, especially since for you it must be the wee small hours. I'm delighted to be here, Centurion, though I wish the circumstances were better. This was sent to the minister, and quite a few other outlets around Britain. Ragnarok handed over the letter and Harry felt Hermione stiffen as she read it beside him. She then turned her attention to Cornelius. Minister Fudge, if you came here to arrest my Harry, then I'm telling you right now, you didn't bring enough people with you. The shocked silence this declaration caused was broken by Barchoke and Ragnarok roaring with laughter, the sight of Hermione more than ready to face down the entire crowd being one of the funniest things they had seen in ages. An angry and tired Bulgarian minister grabbed Cornelius by the arm, wanting a private word. You let a mere girl speak to you like that? No wonder Britain is in the state it's in. Cornelius just smiled at his Bulgarian counterpart, before explaining a few things he needed to know. You're wrong, Borislaw. Miss Hermione Granger is no mere girl. She's Harry's mate, a friend to the nation, and holds their highest award for bravery. She is also an Order of Merlin, first-class holder, and in this instance perfectly correct. We would need a lot more people if we were here to arrest Harry. Just take a look around us. Borislaw then followed the British minister's advice, finding they were now casually surrounded. The people doing so didn't make it obvious, but they would be in real trouble if they reached for their wands. The minister then addressed the assembled group. Let me make the introductions here. Well, of those you haven't met before. This is Borislaw Rablansk, the Bulgarian Minister of Magic. The other wizard you won't know is Brendan Murphy, the Irish Minister of Magic. Harry, is there somewhere we can sit and talk? We're all pretty done in here, but this simply couldn't wait. How private does this need to be? Cornelius just shrugged his shoulders. In around 4 hours, most of magical Britain will wake up this news with their morning cup of tea. That was one of the reasons we couldn't put off informing you. Harry led them toward the beach where he could see tables, chairs and sunshades already being set up. However, he wanted a word with Arthur, Bill and Percy before anything else started. We heard George was injured in the attack. How is he? This saw Bill shaking his head, though he was wearing a wry smile. Already cracking every bad ear joke you could ever want to hear, the 4 boys used their training and kept themselves, Ginny and Ron, safe. I'm really proud of them. They could so easily have panicked, like the vast majority of the people there. That was Amos's cue to try and thank Harry for including Cedric in the training. He'd then trying to thank Bill every 10 minutes since they found all of them safe. Hermione was using the time to catch up with Penny. She appeared rather overawed at her surroundings. Oh, I think I'm going to love my new job, especially if it brings me to places like this. Susan couldn't help but notice how tired her aunt looked. If anyone needed to spend a few days here, it was Amelia Bones. Susan was well aware, however, the chances of that happening were now nil. Her Aunt Amelia was supposed to join them here for the last few days of their holidays. This attack had surely put paid to that. Susan got Amelia sitting in a comfortable beach chair, kicking her shoes off and drinking a fruity concoction that the elves made, and everyone just loved. Amos had followed her lead and couldn't help but blurt out what was on his mind. They were all entering their second night without sleep. Merlin, Amelia, is this where you were heading for your leave? We could all use a few days of this. Even the Bulgarian minister had mellowed somewhat. Borislaw wasn't exactly smiling, but at least he'd stopped scowling. It was hard not to relax in this location. The letter had since been passed around everyone, so it was time for Cornelius to tell them why he was here. That was delivered by a crow in the middle of an emergency Wisengamot meeting. It caused a fair bit of a stir when I read it out to the chamber. Amelia almost choked on her drink at that massive understatement. Or flashback. The letter had a polarizing effect on what was already a very emotive chamber. Everyone present at least knew someone who had been injured or killed last night. That a few of the members appeared to think this letter was a viable means to end all their troubles. Nearly saw them being lynched. Ones were being drawn when Amos fired off a noisemaker curse. We are the law of the land's representatives, and that law will be followed. I will not have this chamber descending into a brawl. Minister Fudge, I believe you still have the floor. Thank you, Chief Warlock. I believe I interrupted Madam Bones, though, and what she was about to say is very prevalent to where we go next. This would also allow Cornelius a few moments to get himself back under control. Witnessing some members of this chamber even considering this letter as an option made him feel sick. He would deal with them after Amelia was finished her presentation. She had known hearing the next part would be hard for the chamber, but after that letter, Amelia knew it was more essential than ever. Knowing that you don't just create an army of inferi out of thin air, saw my department carefully examining those inferious bodies we were able to. We actually managed to identify a few which corroborated our other findings. These were all once people that Riddle and his Death Eaters had murdered during the last war. My department will finally close a lot of missing person files over the next few days. This time the chamber was shocked into silence. With the numbers involved in this attack, again there was a distinct possibility they may have known, or even been related to, someone who had been turned into an inferius. We're certain Riddle used all his inferi last night, and my department would soon notice if he attempted to build another army like that. This led us to considering what other threats he might be able to bring against us. The Dementors are all on Azkaban, and have no wish to leave that island. Centurion Crow killing 3 of them on the Hogwarts Express means they want nothing to do with this fight. They're more than intelligent enough to understand that siding with Riddle could see them wiped out. Amelia checked her notes before continuing. Going over the allies the Death Eaters had in the last war threw up some shocks. The werewolf community, for instance, also want nothing to do with this fight. They can see one of their own teaching at Hogwarts and escorting his Order of Merlin, first class Auror girlfriend to the ministry ball. Compared to that extremely positive example, Riddle has nothing to offer them. He has nothing to offer, nor the manpower to control giants or trolls. Variations of the same themes apply to all those he would naturally look to as allies. That leaves us just Riddle and his two followers, Lestrange and Rookwood, to deal with. She was now staring hard at the chamber, her gaze lingering on those few members who seemed to think this letter was the answer to their prayers. Let's get one thing straight here and now. My department will deal with Tom Riddle. Only if you get to him first. This was growled in a deep and dangerous voice. Amelia had been deliberately averting her gaze from that section of the chamber since Cornelius read out that letter. If she felt sick at the crass way some in the chamber had reacted, it must have been 100 times worse for Ragnarok and Harry's father. She turned and bowed to the goblin leader, recognizing that's where the growl had come from. Director Ragnarok, should the nation apprehend this terrorist before my department gets their hands on him, I would be honored to toast your success with grog. I would gladly get drunk for the first time in many years, knowing I was amongst fellow warriors and friends. Ragnarok actually stood and returned her bow. I hope we get that opportunity, Madam Bones. All our intelligence is coming back blank, leaving us to believe this criminal is in a bolt hole miles from anywhere. Unfortunately, our country is overly abundant with isolated locations like that. But Choke found himself on his feet without even realizing he had risen. The ambassador tried to be diplomatic, but his anger was mighty. This was his family that was being discussed. I feel I must speak here to defend my son. This abomination called my son a coward, not something I can leave unchallenged. Who was it who bested Riddle at the Battle of Bones Manor? Who was it who ran away from Diagon Alley when my son charged down the steps of Gringotts? Ready, willing and able to do battle with this criminal. My son is a centurion, a baron, and holds both our nation's highest awards for bravery. All of it earned. Meanwhile, this murdering, lying, soulless bastard has to invent his own supposed title and animates corpses to do his fighting for him. Who here would kill my son and let this traitorous murdering lump of future dragon shit just leave the country? The goblins' challenge was there for all to see. Anyone answering positively would soon be up to their neck in more shit than they could handle. Barchoke then emphasized that point further. I feel I must also warn you before you begin to make any decisions. Killing my son will not be an easy thing to do. And they will need to go through me first to get to him. Ambassador, my resignation will be made here and now while I swear to fight for justice at Harry's side. I would expect a fair few of my Aurors to join me there too. Amelia's declaration actually brought a smile to Cornelius's face. While nowhere near as proficient with a wand as our esteemed head of the Diamelii, I would still offer that wand up to help Harry in his fight. I promised him that, in any battle with Voldemort, he would have every wand I could muster to support him. If I am no longer minister, I will still honor that promise to stand with him. I could not be minister of magic to any country who even considered these lies. Isn't it our job to consider all the options available? The shout from the Wizengamot was not totally unexpected. It was time for the minister to let his anger out to play. I have spent all of today receiving messages of support from ministries around the globe. We have another 2 ministers of magic with us today in our chamber, both of whom lost citizens in this attack too, and have pledged their country's support for our efforts to catch these criminals. How long do you think that support would last if we even acknowledged this? No ministry in the world would give in to terrorist demands, and that's exactly what this letter is. Cornelius let that sit for a minute before getting down to the real nitty-gritty. We sit in this chamber in complete safety and then go home to our protected houses. Our children leave on Monday to a Hogwarts that has the strongest wards protecting the castle in centuries, while our sick are safe in a St. Mungo's that's just as heavily warded. Meanwhile, you want us to debate our murdering one of the most prominent citizens of the very nation who gave us these great bones. The minister knew what argument would be coming next, and Cornelius had it well and truly covered. Before some of the more ill-informed of you mentions gold changing hands, I feel I must point a few home truths out. First, it was the aforementioned Centurion Crow and his mate Miss Granger, who provided half the gold toward Hogwarts, their 2 best friends chipping in the other 50%. As to St. Mungo's, Our friends at Gringotts refused to take one knut in payment for warding a hospital. They were just as disgusted as we were that such a step was even necessary. Witches and wizards of the Wizengamot, that is friendship, that is honor. Two concepts Tom Riddle knows nothing about. Taking a few deep breaths, Cornelius centered himself to finish his argument. In this chamber as in our country, no one is above the rule of the law. Chief Warlock, what does our laws tell us about this situation? There was no hesitation, this time from Amos. Here was something he was every bit as passionate about supporting as Cornelius and Amelia. For Riddle's supposed solution to be officially discussed in this chamber, it is first to be proposed by a member and then seconded by another. You will also then need to elect a new Chief Warlock, because I want no part of that. My son is still alive because he trains with Centurion Crow every week. That training gave him and his friends the skills they needed to survive last night, putting down 4 inferi in the process. My son and I will fight at Harry's side. Having made his way down to Amelia, Cornelius again addressed the chamber from her side. Members of the Wizengamot, there you have it. The question is, would any of you like to make that proposal? They had been joined by Amos as the 3 most politically powerful figures in Britain stared down any opposition. It was like watching an auction for some hideously expensive item. People were sitting completely still in case a twitch of their eyebrow was construed as a bid on their behalf. The darker elements within the Wizengamot were well known, and faced being obliterated from all sides if one of them was stupid enough to open their mouths. Cornelius slowly let out a breath. He didn't even know he'd been holding. Any such proposal was always going to be defeated. But even discussing such a proposal in the chamber would have been rightfully considered a grave insult by the nation. The minister didn't think he was overstating things when he thought their government might not survive that happening. There would either have been a war against the nation, with Centurion Crow fighting at the front of their warriors, or Gringotts would have simply closed its doors. All it had needed was for one stupid member to demand their rights to discuss that option, and they were screwed, both at home and abroad. They may have teetered on the edge, but now it was time to pull back from the precipice. He handed the vile note to Barchoke before continuing. Now to get back on track, I have to announce receiving Ludo Bagman's resignation, and reluctantly accepting it. While in no way accountable for what happened last night, Ludo felt it was the honorable thing to do. Who present? As the tale was told, Harry really didn't know what to say. Amelia tried to help him out. We all really prefer the direction our nations are moving in. None of us wants to go back to the bad old days. Riddle knows you have been the catalyst for these changes. That's why that letter was sent. Again, his lack of intelligence of these changes shows any member of the Wizengamot trying to act on that would have been torn to shreds by their fellow members, and they all knew it. Harry thanked them all profusely before turning to his father. Does this mean we can go home now? I think we should still wait until we had planned to leave for King Goosey. Give things a day or so to settle down. There shouldn't be any trouble once you reach Hogwarts. Penny couldn't help but chuckle at that. Between the castle looking after him and Crow's marauders ready to take out anyone who says a bad word against these 4, Hogwarts is probably as safe as this island, not as pretty though. Harry then invited their guests to stay for lunch, breakfast or whatever meal their body clocks said it was time for. The Irish minister answered for all of them by saying he might never want to leave here ever again. Borislaw then introduced a somber note to the sunshine. As much as that would please me, there are duties I must carry out. My country have just entered 3 days of mourning, and I will take the bodies home. Your Dark Lord have made a big mistake. Some of my countrymen may have been, how do you say, sympathy to his cause. Not anymore. Using inferi to slaughter innocents. Will send disgust around the world. This was a view shared by Brendan. He certainly got it wrong with the Irish. What he did at the cup final just got us mad, fighting mad. Cornelius, you need any help with this, then I can promise you the Irish will be there. The elves prepared a buffet, where people could help themselves. But Minister Fudge had one more thing to mention before they could relax and enjoy the food. Arrangements were at a very advanced stage to bring a prestigious tournament back to Hogwarts. A tournament that will see the best of Hogwarts compete against 2 visiting schools. One of those schools will be from Bulgaria. Since we now suspect Riddle has all the details of this tournament, It's being changed as we speak. The competing schools were originally due to arrive in Scotland for Halloween. They will now arrive in time for the Merlin Ball, with the first task taking place around Halloween. These details will also be in the Daily Prophet, spoiling the big reveal at Hogwarts on the 1st of September. The mere thought of visiting schools threw up many questions from this inquisitive group of Hogwarts students, most of which were answered over a lovely brunch. Barchuk had taken his son aside. There were things he needed to discuss with Harry before he headed off to Hogwarts. Severus found his welcome in this now familiar office to be far more cordial than on his previous visits, a reaction that he'd been noticing more and more since replacing that hated tattoo on his arm with a dragon. "Good evening, Potions Master Snape, please take a seat. I have a proposition for you, one you have my assurance that the choice of whether to accept will be purely yours to make. All I ask is that you at least give it some thought." He would certainly agree to mull over whatever Barchok wanted to talk with him about, and his curiosity now had Severus wanting to find out exactly what this proposition was. The good thing about dealing with goblins was he didn't have to wait too long before discovering just what that proposition entailed. Professor Slughorn is claiming that the attack on the World Cup final proves Britain isn't safe anymore. He just handed Augusta his resignation from Hogwarts. Personally, I believe it was being the only Hogwarts professor not invited to the Baron's Fair that put his nose seriously out of joint. He's just using the attack as an excuse. Both my son and daughter really can't stand the leech, and wouldn't even consider having him in their home. This leaves an opening for a potions professor at Hogwarts, a job we would all like you to consider, even on a short-term basis. Augusta and Minerva have their hands full making arrangements for this rescheduled tournament. Needing to fill both the potions position and appoint a new head of Slytherin for Monday are serious problems they could do without. You could solve both their problems, even if it was only long enough to allow them to find a replacement for Sluggy. Severus just sat there staring at Barchok with no idea what to say next. I realize this is probably something that on first hearing you might not want to do, but I would like you to consider it for two reasons. First, it proves to everyone that you are no Death Eater, since having the dark mark would prove fatal to anyone trying to enter Hogwarts. Secondly, there is your godson to consider. Mentioning Draco clearly pricked Severus's attention, so Barchok concentrated on that area. My own son has benefited greatly from having his godfather back in his life. I'm sure the same could be said for Draco. While Sirius has done his best to protect Draco and his mother, I'm positive he would rather have his godfather there to advise him. Draco really is turning into fine young wizard, nothing like his father. Still in something of a dither after having this dropped on him out of the blue, Severus asked his first question. More to buy some time until he sorted his own scrambled thoughts on the matter. Won't your son have a problem with me being back in Hogwarts? Harry hopes to one day take over from me as ambassador. I think his decision here shows he might have some flair for the job. The four involved are all of the opinion that you were nothing more than a young wizard caught between two powerful foes, a mere pawn in their grand schemes, and that you genuinely feel remorse for what happened. They won't be taking your classes, but neither will they object to you being back in the castle. The potions master then broached what Severus would consider the real problem to his returning. What about Black and Lupin? We never really got on while at Hogwarts as students. I can't see that changing much if we were professors together. Barchok was actually grinning at that. The Sirius Black that I know probably bears little resemblance to the one you attended Hogwarts with as a student. I explained to Sirius what I wanted from him before he would be allowed back into Harry's life. He had no objections, and has done a wonderful job as a godfather to both Harry and Hermione. A certain Estrid Aurora Black being born has also had a tremendous impact on him, nearly as much as Lady Henrika Black. I think you'll find Remus Lupin a changed man too. Basically they finally grew up. Or the fact they both now have witches in their lives who expect better of them might be nearer the truth. Weighing up his options, Severus thought it might be nice to teach again. With no Dumbledore, and knowing it wasn't a long-term deal, he might actually enjoy it. A short stint teaching at Hogwarts would also out the fact he wasn't a Death Eater, something worth a lot more than gold to Severus. A spell teaching in Hogwarts would allow him to have it all, be able to live and work in both communities. For the first time, Severus appreciated the dilemma facing Lily's son. That both his mother and chosen mate were Muggle-born simply added another level of complexity to Harry's problem. While he'd already made his mind up, it wouldn't do any harm to keep them waiting on his decision. "Can I sleep on this and give you my answer tomorrow?" But Choke was a shrewd enough negotiator to know he already had his man. He graciously allowed the wizard a day's grace. They had been somewhat isolated and immune from the tragedy that had befallen Britain after the Cup final, being on the island and then returning to Kincussy. That immunity was stripped away as they faced the harsh reality of frightened people on platform 9 3/4. While the majority of casualties had been from Bulgarian and Irish Quidditch supporters, there were still British witches and wizards who had been murdered most foully that night. Harry was soon to discover for himself exactly what the British wizarding public thought of Riddle's ploy, though the Prophet had certainly helped set the tone. The entire country was well aware exactly what Riddle was: a ruthless, lying, murdering psychopath with delusions of being a deity. They then asked the simple question of why the country should turn on the only person this maniac seemed afraid of. It had labored the point that the country's children would be far safer in Hogwarts if the castle's chosen champion was there too, something they should all work together toward achieving. The young centurion wasn't sure how to handle the first person who came forward to shake his hand, smiling that they now knew their children would be safe at Hogwarts. This action was repeated often as the group slowly made its way along the platform. McGonagall had officially recognized the Marauders as sanctioned Hogwarts lessons, and they were now part of the curriculum. She also recognized the trainers involved. They now all held positions in authority, similar to those of a prefect. She'd offered badges to signify this, but the girls involved had chosen something different. Since Harry had been the instigator of the entire Marauders project, they wanted these symbols of rank to reflect that. They would wear epaulets on the shoulders of their robes, similar to the ones he wore, indicating Harry was of Centurion rank. They would have a silver M for Marauder, followed by the year group they were teaching displayed in Roman numerals. Harry was so touched at their idea, he took it a stage further. Those epaulets were attached to jet black dragonhide dueling robes, the now official uniform of Marauder trainers. Tonks was also wearing a set, though colored to imitate her official Aurora robes, with even the ministry insignia on them. Asking Amelia's permission for Tonks to wear the robes as a uniform, got an immediate yes, and a request for a price per set to see if she could afford getting more of her auras protected like this. Tonks herself had objected at the expense until Harry pulled a masterstroke. He told her it was an engagement present. Remus was never going to object to something that kept his wife to be safe. A smiling Tonks glancing at the ring on her finger meant the battle was already won. The couple would be receiving another present when everyone recovered from the surprise announcement. They were quite the sight as they strolled along the platform, dressed in uniform. Even the Weasleys had arrived early, and there was now 16 trainers in black dragonhide on the platform. They certainly had a calming effect on the parents who felt their children would be safer with this people around. Amelia had flooded the platform with auras, but these trainers would be in the castle every day along with their children. It had soon gotten out just how well some of these trainers had acquitted themselves at the World Cup. Not something Amos was likely to stop boasting about anytime soon, and they had all witnessed the demonstrations at the Baron's Fair. The parents certainly wanted their children learning these skills. Susan and Blaze had talked about which members of Crow's Marauders they wanted to help them with the new first year. They would wait until they could meet with Daphne and Terry before any decisions were finalized. Harry had another 4 robes that would be handed out then. Parvati was on Blaze's arm and thought the new robes made him appear even more handsome. He'd asked her if they could give being a couple another try, and she must have cried for an hour while clinging tightly to him. She'd been an idiot, chasing fun and adventure while ignoring what she already had. Her sister's words were finally getting through her thick skull. Sitting with Blaze's arm around her as the sun sank into the sea wasn't boring. Parvati now, though it was bloody wonderful. She would have a lot more time to listen to her sister from now on. While still a Gryffindor, Parvati Patil would be bunking in Ravenclaw. It couldn't be helped that she would still share some classes with Lavender, but her father had made it perfectly clear that would be as far as their interaction went. Parvati now realized how much she'd hurt her parents with her behavior. That would not be happening again. Natalie raced over to join the group, with Ewan in one hand and Orla in her other. They were soon joined by a pair of excited Creevy boys and Pauline not. Since Luna had travelled with them, Harry was delighted to see all 6 Potter Scholarship students clearly happy to see one another again. Unsure of what reception they would receive and not wanting their brother put at any risk whatsoever, they had said their goodbyes to all 3 Grangers in King Essie. With the Blacks already in Hogwarts, that left the Longbottoms and Patils to escort the group to the Express. They were saying their farewells when Harry noticed a little girl in tears. He made his way over and knelt beside her. "Hey Maggie, what's wrong?" It took her a moment to answer through her tears. "I want to go on the train with Dennis and Colin. I want to go to Hogwarts too." His arm went comfortingly around the little girl who still wore her hat from the fair. "Do you see that girl there with the long red hair? Is that Ginny? Colin says she's a friend of his." "Yes, that's Ginny Weasley. She had to stand exactly where you are now many times. You see, Ginny has 6 older brothers who all went to Hogwarts before her. She eventually got to go too, and still had 4 of her brothers at Hogwarts when she got there. Your time will come, Maggie, and Colin and Dennis will still be there. You might even have one of them taking your Marauder Club by then." Her eyes went wide at that thought. Harry used Maggie's distraction to touch the tip of his knife to her now battered hat. That her hat was instantly like new drew a gasp from the little 9-year-old Creevy. "I'll make sure Colin and Dennis write to you at least once a week. The Christmas holidays will be here before you know it." As Harry left to take Hermione's arm while she boarded the train, his mate couldn't resist gently teasing him. "What is it with you and young damsels in distress at this station? I know how bad I felt leaving Jamie earlier. I just had to help." This saw him being gently kissed. "Not something I will ever complain about, love. It's still hard to believe it was only 3 years ago you helped an 11-year-old Hermione Granger onto this train." Hermione was now the one being kissed as Harry wished her a happy anniversary. They'd now been best friends for exactly 3 years. 3 wonderful years. Sirius was also reminiscing with the girl in his arms. He was walking around the empty Hogwarts corridors, while chatting to Astrid. Sirius was so engrossed telling his daughter a funny story that he almost walked right into Severus Snape. "Oh, hello, sorry about that. I was so busy talking to my daughter that I didn't see you. I heard you were returning to Hogwarts." "Yes. I was asked to come back and help out. I'm pleased to see your daughter takes after her mother, in looks at least." While his comment could be considered sarcasm, there was no hint of malice, or Snape's usual sneer. Sirius actually laughed at that. "Well, since my wife's beauty could only one day hope to be matched by our daughter's, I'll certainly take that as a compliment. Things have really changed, Severus, and I mean really changed. The head of the House of Black is married to a Veela while teaching Muggle studies. My mother must be spinning in her grave. Our godsons are at the forefront of that change. If Draco and Harry can become such good friends, do you think we could at least stop being enemies? Since we will one day be family, I suppose we really should try." Seeing Sirius's confusion almost had Severus smiling. "Almost. Isn't Pansy Black betrothed to my godson?" This had Sirius laughing again. "Now there's something I didn't consider when I set that betrothal up. Ah, well, too late to change it now." His wide smile indicated Sirius had no intention of changing anything. "I want to thank you for that. I know how close those two are. Sorry, but that's not something I can take the credit for. I just helped out where I could." Pansy approached Hermione and Padma for help with stopping her father breaking her betrothal to Draco. "Those 2 witches make the Marauders look as if we weren't really trying. However, I really want to thank you for giving Harry that photo album. It couldn't have been easy for you, and it's one of his most prized possessions. When I look at your godson, I don't really see his father, though some of his actions are pure Lily." "I would have to disagree with you there, Severus. The more I see Harry, the more I see it's his father's influence that has molded him into the person he is today. His sense of honor and the code by which he lives his life is pure Barchoke, something I have no complaints about. I ruined my chances of ever raising Harry when I chased after Peter. I'm delighted to see you grabbing the opportunity to get back into Draco's life." "No one's told Draco, have they?" "No, it will be quite the surprise." Harry and Neville were consulted, which means their girls know too. Those four, though, know how to keep a secret. Just back and already pulling pranks. Way to go, Severus. The baby in his arms gave a little happy gurgle at her father's antics, an action that saw Sirius's entire face light up with joy. I need to complete Astrid's tour and get her back to our apartment. With Henrika actually teaching more classes than me, Astrid and I will be spending a lot of time together. I need all the help I can get to make her a daddy's girl. You've met her mother, she's pretty special. As Sirius made his way down the corridor, still chatting away to the beautiful baby in his arms, Severus was left certain of only one thing. There had been some really big changes during his time at Gringotts. Dolores was sitting in her Hogwarts apartment, struggling to get her shaking under control. As she glanced around her new accommodation, it wasn't the decor that interested Dolores. Those thick stone castle walls were very comforting, but not nearly as comforting as being behind those wonderful wards that denied access to witches and wizards branded with the dark mark. Her own home didn't possess those wards. Hence how Lestrange and Rookwood were able to bypass that security and enter her bedroom. Dolores had never met Voldemort, and if Lestrange was any guide, she never wanted to. That was one crazy witch, and she was certain only Rookwood's presence saved her from getting up close and personal with Lestrange's knife. They wanted information. Information Dolores didn't have to give. With most of the details still to be worked out for the revised tournament, there really wasn't any information she could give them. At that point Dolores thought her life was over. There was not one shred of doubt in her mind that Bellatrix would have happily carved her into little pieces if Rookwood hadn't suggested they needed eyes and ears inside the castle. Dolores was ordered to write a report and then place it behind a rock, well outside the castle wards, on the path from Hogwarts to Hogsmeade. Since she wasn't a professor, she could easily leave the castle and stroll down to the village any given Saturday. They wanted a report every second Saturday, and would be watching the route to see where she bent down to take a stone out of her shoe. This was the dilemma responsible for her shaking, trying to decide what to do next. The way Dolores saw it, she had three choices. She could do as they ordered, which would see her end up in Azkaban if she was ever caught. There was also the option of going to Bones, however the Ministry would probably just use her as a decoy in the hope of catching Voldemort. She was not Baron Crow. There would be no public uproar because Dolores Umbridge would simply be considered expendable. Her final choice was just to stay safely in the castle, hoping against hope that Voldemort would be defeated before she had to leave next summer. She had at most 2 weeks before the decision was made for her. Dolores' non-appearance at Hogsmeade 2 weekends in a row would put her right near the top of Voldemort's shit list. Thinking it would be expected of her since they had worked in the same department, Dolores had visited Bertha in St. Mungo's. She never wanted to end up like that. Dolores now knew for certain that some things were certainly worse than death. She'd seen one with her own eyes. Harry was handing out marauder robes to the 4 new trainers, delighted with the choices that had been made. Luna and Colin's experience looking after the younger Potter scholars had made them a natural choice for this responsibility. Since Ginny had also thrown herself into helping the younger students, she too was a good choice. Laura Burns was a Slytherin who had taken to the marauders like a duck to water. She had embraced the concept of no barriers and worked really hard every week. The 4 Slytherin trainers all agreed she was the strongest supporter of their cause in the House of Snakes. So Lyra now took that number up to 5. The 2 Gryffindors pushed their house representation up to 5 too. Luna's inclusion meant the Ravenclaw contingent was still the largest, 7 marauder trainers in all, with only Cedric, Susan and Hannah from Hufflepuff. They might have looked to increase that number. Susan was adamant though that they had picked the 4 best people for the job. Crow's marauders were considered mature enough that the 4 friends thought they could handle the group themselves. They would still have the quartet of crows, who would now be helping the first years, in their group if they needed any help organizing a particular exercise. Draco, Pansy, Hannah and Morag would continue with their own marauders, taking over next year when the 4 prefects entered their NEDUEOT year, and bowed out. Their long-term plan saw marauder classes running until the students being taught reached their 5th year, with lesson plans being passed down the line from trainers to trainers. Producing future trainers was crucial to the continuation of the program, which was why Harry had introduced the robes. Witnessing the awe that Dennis now held his elder brother in, Harry would bet there would be a letter getting sent home tonight, was exactly the reaction he'd hoped to achieve. Here was something for the students to aspire to, something to aim for that could be in their grasp in only 2 short years. News of the 4 new trainers being appointed spread a little happiness along the train. Albus Dumbledore read the latest news from Britain, and it ignited a little flame of happiness in him too. It was now time for his return. There were a fair number of students who could now see the Perstrals pulling the carriages to Hogwarts, simply because they had attended the Quidditch World Cup final. They had found themselves sucked into the horror that followed. With so much death around, very few who had been in those woods that night had not witnessed at least one person die. The prefects and marauder trainers started work early, comforting those who were upset and ensuring everyone made it up to the castle. Since Padma was sticking to Parvati like glue tonight, Harry, Hermione, Draco, Pansy and the Weasley twins were on the last carriage heading up to the castle. George wasn't going to let a little thing like having part of his ear bitten off get him down. The jokes were coming thick and fast, but Harry and Hermione had the last laugh. The Slytherin couple and the Gryffindor twins froze as they entered the Great Hall. 4 pairs of eyes were now fixed on a certain individual sitting at the staff table. They were not by any means the only students staring in that direction. They were the ones Harry and Hermione were laughing at though. This saw the focus of their 4 friends switch to them. A smiling Harry answered their unasked questions. Yes, Fred and George, we will still have our potions lessons from Master Pitsley. No, Draco and Pansy. The wards were not altered to accommodate Professor Snape. But how? There's a very simple answer, Draco. You can't enter Hogwarts bearing a dark mark, therefore Professor Snape doesn't have one. No dark mark means he's not a Death Eater. The smirk on Hermione's face as she said that gave the game away. At least to the Slytherins. You knew, and didn't tell us. Harry was smiling too as they made their way into the hall and toward their tables. Sorry, Draco, your godfather wanted to surprise you. Hermione couldn't help but channel her inner Padma. I think he surprised a lot more people than his godson. Such was the esteem Harry and Hermione were held inside Hogwarts. Seeing them smiling and laughing about this instantly put the message out that Snape's return was not a problem. The first years were led in, taking Hermione's thoughts back to her own sorting. She hoped tonight's passed off with a bit less drama than theirs had. They were all hoping for a quiet year. The hat surprised everyone by singing this year's message. Watching Sirius and Remus almost choking with laughter, answered the question of where the ancient Hogwarts artifact had heard Johnny Cash songs. Hermione recognized the tune at once. I Walk the Line being one of her father's favorite songs. A certain Muggle studies professor would appear to have gotten the first prank of the year in, if you didn't count Professor Snape sitting at the staff table as a prank. With his surname being Abercrombie, Ewan was first to be sorted. He couldn't hide his delight at Hufflepuff being shouted and shot off the stool to join a loudly cheering Natalie, forgetting to take the hat off his head. Dennis was every bit as pleased to be joining Colin in Gryffindor, while Orla couldn't help but smile at the warm welcome she received when the hat shouted Ravenclaw. She was quiet throughout the feast until Morrig called out to her. Dinner fash yersel Orla, you're amongst muckers new. You'll find your accent wall soon. You'll find your accent wall soon. Even out, mine's Enil kicks in new and a git. Pure crabbit. All Morrig's friends knew her accent was never as thick as that. They had barely understood one word in 3 there. But the smile of pure joy on Orla's face meant nothing would be getting said. The hat put Orla in Ravenclaw, and they would be doing their best to help any claw that needed it, irrespective of her being a Potter scholar. When Madame Longbottom stood to announce the Tri-Wizard tournament would be held in Hogwarts this year, she received a muted response. Even mentioning the other 2 schools who would be competing didn't generate any excitement. To most of the hall they were just a pair of names. Mentioning that Quidditch would be cancelled this year certainly upped the ante, just not in the way the staff might have hoped. The no Quidditch declaration created quite an uproar. When it quietened down, only one person was left standing. Ron had of course read the papers and knew about the tournament that would be held in Hogwarts. Since this was going to be the year he made his play to join the Quidditch team, he'd asked his father how the school was going to run both Ron had known Quidditch was going to be cancelled and had come prepared. This was his dream they were messing with, and he was ready to fight for it. Between asking his father questions and even reading the relevant chapters in a few books, Ron had for once done his homework. Madam Longbottom, I must protest that decision. There are students in this school hoping to make a career from Quidditch. Cancelling a year so only one person from Hogwarts can compete in this tournament is unfair on the rest of us. Between the Barons' Fair and the World Cup final, Quidditch has never had such a high profile. Contacts have been made, contacts that will soon be forgotten about if there is no Quidditch this year. The last game a lot of us watched ended up with some of us fighting for our lives. I love Quidditch and don't want that to be our memory of the sport. Even Ron's own siblings were looking at him and wondering where their real brother was. The rest of the school were too surprised to even comment. It was well known he was obsessed with the sport, that he'd just put forward a reasoned defense of why Quidditch shouldn't be cancelled. Was the surprise. Augusta was going to have to disappoint him though. I'm sorry, Mr. Weasley, we simply won't have the time to organize both. Ron then turned to the last person the Great Hall expected him to go to for aid. Harry, mate, you managed to organize an entire fairy, including 2 Quidditch matches with professional teams. Could you help us out here? Harry was just about to say he wouldn't even know where to start when the decision was taken out of his hands. Dolores had watched this brat challenge, things she'd soon be arranging, and wasn't best pleased. When the carrot then tried to involve the crane, she exploded. Sit down, boy. There are things happening here that are a lot more important than some school Quidditch games. The Ministry are backing the Tri-Wizard tournament, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Crow. To be fair to Ron, he stood his ground. Hogwarts has anatomy at IMI. The Ministry has no say in Hogwarts business. It can't cancel Quidditch. Harry, please. Sit down when you're told, boy. Dolores was halted in her rant by another boy standing. This one was an entirely different matter. Harry slowly stood, his new dragonhide robe emphasizing not only his height but his broad shoulders too. With his long black hair, imposing green eyes, badges of rank on his shoulders and sword at his hip, Centurion Crow appeared every inch the Hogwarts champion he was. Even Dolores didn't interrupt him when he spoke, especially since he was staring straight at her. 3 years ago this very night, Hogwarts appointed me her champion. I was asked many times what that meant, and I had to honestly answer that I hadn't a clue. I have since learned, however, and I'll give all of you that answer now. Hogwarts isn't a castle, it isn't a particular headmaster or person. Hogwarts is an idea that witches and wizards of whatever background can come together to learn magic. The hall was silent now. Even Hermione hadn't heard this from Harry before. Hogwarts was sick of people abusing that idea for their own ends, be that certain groups or even individuals trying to twist those ideals to prop up their own agenda. She made me her champion in the hope I could put a stop to that. I'm doing my best. This actually started a few people clapping, the applause soon becoming thunderous. Harry eventually had to hold his hand up for quiet. He had more to say. This here is who I champion. The students of Hogwarts, one of whom was just given short shrift. People who know me will understand I'm not a fan of Quidditch, nor could Ronald and I be considered friends. He stood though and made some very good points. Points that should not see him being shouted down by someone who is merely a visitor in the castle. Hogwarts doesn't recognize Madame Umbridge as having any authority over the students inside this castle. She is here as a ministerial advisor to this tournament, nothing more. Augusta was glaring daggers at Dolores, and couldn't miss seeing Harry's barb hit home. Madame High and Mighty Umbridge would simply hate being put in her place by Harry Crow. Madame Longbottom, I think the reactions shown here tonight indicate that the vast majority of the students want to continue with the Quidditch matches. What would you need for that to happen? Again Dolores exploded. I will not have some school Quidditch matches overshadowing my tournament. Harry was on her before anyone else got the chance. Your tournament? Well, that certainly ends my interest in it. It can't be much of a tournament if Hufflepuff playing Ravenclaw overshadows it. He once more turned his attention back to Augusta. I'm assuming these 2 schools will bring more than one student with them. What if we invited them to put up Quidditch teams too? We could have 4 house teams plus 1 from each school, competing in a friendly tournament. I'm pretty sure I could convince Gringotts to come up with some prizes, if Hogwarts or the Ministry didn't want that honor. Watching Umbridge's complexion turn puce actually brought a smile to Augusta's face. That sounds like a wonderful suggestion, Centurion, but it doesn't solve the problem of the staff being too busy to administer the thing. Ma'am, we have 4 Quidditch captains, who could organize the schedules, ensuring the dates didn't clash with any you wanted kept clear. We used professional referees at the fair. That arrangement could stand again. The students on duty at the fair did a wonderful job of directing the crowds where they needed to go. They too could easily do the same for these matches. It would also be easy to ensure they got the day off those duties when their house is playing. The prefects and marauder trainers could organize schedules for that as part of their duties. The fair at Kinkersey proved that when Hogwarts works together, anything is possible. We can do this, Madam Longbottom. Centurion, I want you to meet with the Quidditch captains and sort a plan out. They will then present it to the staff at our meeting on Friday evening. This is not a yes, but it's not a no either. That was good enough for Hogwarts. The cheering this time was everything, and now livid. Umbridge was hoping here for the Triwizard Tournament. She stormed back to her rooms. Dolores had a report to write. When little shits like that gained power, it was time to take some action to restore the natural balance back to where it should be. Aula was sitting with her jaw hanging open. Luna was beside her, so the new first year asked her blonde friend a question. Is it I like this at Hogwarts? Luna, resplendent in her new black dragonhide robes, could only smile at the awestruck little witch. When any of our 4 are involved, I would have to say that would usually be a yes. Aula's answer of Stoughton may have confused Luna. Her meaning was clear though from the wide smile she wore. It looked like they were in for another interesting year at Hogwarts. Harry was talking with Roger, the reason why his friend wasn't appointed Quidditch captain this year now clear. I'm gonna need your help again. I still know nothing about Quidditch, except Hermione looks good in a Harpies jersey. Then again, Hermione looks good in anything. Nice save there, Harry. I'll talk to the people involved, and see what we can come up with. Roger, could you include Ron in that? It was kinda his idea, and it took a lot of guts to get up and say what he did. Sure, Harry, without him, there wouldn't be any Quidditch this year. By the way, is that the same Umbridge who challenged you to a duel at the Ministry Ball a couple of years ago? The very same, Roger. That was why I referred to her as a visitor. She will have some say in whoever enters the tournament, but none whatsoever in the day-to-day running of Hogwarts. I get the feeling Madam Longbottom and Professor McGonagall will soon be pointing that out to her. They found themselves then being joined by Cedric. Harry, they obviously knew there would be no Quidditch this year. I'm the only Quidditch captain currently in Hogwarts since the other 3 all left at the summer and the Hogwarts staff didn't appoint new ones. It was actually Hermione who offered up a simple solution from a non-Quidditch perspective. Since this won't be an official Hogwarts tournament, couldn't the players just get together and pick their own captain? Fred and George had arrived by that time and thought that was a great idea. Except for one thing. Both of their girlfriends would be up for the job. People were dropping over to say goodnight before they headed off to their own houses. Harry was having a quick word with a happy Ewan when Susan supplied the twins with a solution to their problem. Well, McGonagall set the precedent when she made the both of you prefects. Why not have Angelina and Alicia as joint captains? Gryffindor are only looking to fill one position anyway. That's a great idea, Susan. Thanks. We think that's what got Ron so riled up. He's hoping to try out for keeper this year. The now excited students headed off to their dorms. Very few of them were talking about the Triwizard Tournament. Eternal Glory didn't really wash, since none of them had heard of the tournament before. Far less the names of any previous winners. The 1,000 galleon prize had generated a fair degree of enthusiasm, until they discovered that only those of age could enter. Since that didn't apply to over 80% of the students, what was there left about this tournament to get excited about? Parvati was excited to discover she had her own room, one that was placed between Padma and Hermione's. However, she was more excited about the welcome she had received in Ravenclaw. She had simply been accepted into their house without any fuss whatsoever. How are you settling in? Oh Padma, it's great. A bit quieter than I'm used to. Yeah, that's us Ravenclaws for you. Quiet and reserved. This got both of them giggling. The number of scrapes a certain Ravenclaw trio got themselves into could hardly be classed as quiet or reserved. With our timetable being the same as last year, I was wondering if we could keep Tuesday evenings free for just some Patil girl time. That would be great. What about Hermione? Oh, she's planning on using that to have some Harry time. The advantage of having a boyfriend who's in the same house as you. After a good night hug, it was time for bed. They had classes in the morning. They started the year off with double transfiguration. Professor McGonagall telling them that this year would be the last that the current OWL exam would be in operation. Their exam would be considerably different. The following year, it would be 70% practical, but those practical levels would be nearer the current NEWOT's standard. They were working on what type of questions to ask for the written part, and they would mainly consist of essays. There were no groans from anyone in the class as they were given an essay to write as homework. This was easily their lightest subject for that particular activity. Professor McGonagall saying their essays would be sent away to the examination board to assist them with producing their final exam, and a marking system put slightly more pressure on. They still spent most of the double period with their wands in their hands. They were holding back at the end of the class. McGonagall wanting a quick word with Parvati when Ron approached the group. Harry, I just wanted to say thanks for your support last night. Without it, I was going to be on to a hiding. You're a decent bloke, Harry. Having said his piece, Ron left the four friends and Blaise rather stunned. Are we sure that's Ronald Weasley? What are the chances of that being someone else? Polyjuice to fool us all. Neville had to disagree with his betrothed. Sorry, love. He still snores exactly like Ron. You would need something better than Polyjuice to pull that off. Padma then asked the question she wanted to ask Neville, just not while Parvati was around. How did Gryffindor react to Lavender? For a Gryffindor to drop a fellow housemate into trouble, purely so they could protect themselves, is not behavior becoming of Godric's house. She kept quiet while her father pushed all the blame onto Parvati. Lavender will now have to get used to that quiet. Very few in Gryffindor wanted anything to do with her. She certainly stayed well away from me, Colin and Ginny. Blaise could understand that reaction. In Slytherin their treatment would probably be a lot worse. Parvati said she enjoyed her first night in Ravenclaw. It's time for all of us to put this behind us. Lavender made her bed. Let her lie in it. At that, Parvati came out and Blaise offered his arm. The three couples made their way lunch. An excited Draco was waiting on them in the Great Hall. He had some news to share. My godfather has offered to be staff sponsor for our Marauders tonight. Sirius is gonna stick with the Crows, while Remus wants to work with the new first year. Henrika has her hands full with Ustrade and wanted to give the Marauders a miss this year. Padma just couldn't resist. That's brilliant, Draco. You get to tell Fred and George, though. Watching Draco's face fall had all of them laughing. That should be a good meeting tonight. The four oldest trainers actually cornered Harry later for a quick word. We know you know more than you're saying. We don't need to know what you know. We just need to know Snape can be trusted. Harry was left with his usual feeling when faced with the twins. Only this time it was slightly different. You know, guys, that whole twin speak thing you do is a lot less effective now we can tell you apart. It was Roger who attempted to get things back on course. Seriously, Harry, we just need to know if Snape has another agenda for volunteering. We've no intention of letting anyone spoil something we all consider to be one of the best things that's happened in Hogwarts for generations. If I'm reading this right, and I'm sure I am, it's simply a way to spend some time with his godson, Draco. You guys just do what you'd normally do, take the class, and forget your sponsors there. Any advice he gives at the end of the night should be listened to, just the same as if it was from Henrika or Remus. That seemed to settle them down. Harry then caught up with Hermione as they headed off to Rithmonsea. Dinner that evening was followed by the first Marauder class of the year. There was another 8 trainers putting their heads together while going over how they would handle the new first years tomorrow night. They had a tremendous advantage over the other groups, however. 4 trainers who had come through the class as students. The 4 friends were taking it easy tonight. They knew their training kicked back in tomorrow. After what happened at the Cup final, they were anticipating that training being intensified. By the time Master Pitsley arrived for their potions lesson on Friday afternoon, it was beginning to feel like they'd never been away from Hogwarts. He surprised the class by assigning every one of them a different potion to brew. It was all potions they had already covered in their last term, but it was a short, sharp shock form of revision, with the use of their wonderful potions books. And looking back at the copious notes everyone made while originally preparing their potion, all managed to brew what they'd been allocated to a standard that pleased their tutor. It was a smiling Master Pitsley who then informed them what potions they would be brewing first thing Monday morning. They were all looking forward to the weekend, though the four would have a slight change to their training schedule. They would still work with Bill in the mornings, but their afternoons would now see them taking those lessons from Sirius in the Black's apartment. This would allow all of them to spend some time together while Harry of course got to see his goddaughter. There was still the not-so-small matter of settling whether there would be Quidditch played at Hogwarts this year. Harry had attended the preliminary meetings but intended to let the captains sort this one out with the staff themselves. Roger, Cedric, Alessia, Angelina, and Adrian Pusey of Slytherin set off, with much cheering from their fellow students urging them on. They had crossed the T's and dotted the I's of their proposal, with only the dates needing to be settled. With McGonagall's love of the sport well known, no one was taking bets on it not happening. Severus couldn't believe what was happening. Here was as graphic a demonstration as you could ask for on how much things had changed. The Quidditch captains were making a quite compelling case for why there should still be Quidditch played at Hogwarts this year, and they were being listened to by the staff. In the past, Albus would have fed them some patronizing spiel, patted them on the head before sending them on their way. Hogwarts ran the way he wanted it to, end of story. Augusta was also on the mark, putting Umbridge in her place before the meeting even got started, pointing out that, since Dolores was a guest of Hogwarts, she could attend the meeting if she wanted but would play no part in the discussions, or any decisions made. Watching two of the captains took Severus back to the other night, and his first look at this defense club to say he was amazed would be an understatement. Not only was the content being taught well thought out and delivered brilliantly, watching Draco and Pansy seamlessly partner the Weasley twins was a revelation. Minerva couldn't help rubbing his nose in it by pointing out Fred and George's OTW marks more than merited the badges they wore. He could also have done without hearing they would be sitting their potions. Nani said a year early, or that their tutor expected them to match the outstanding they received for their OTW. The captains were proposing 2 leagues of 3 teams, the winner of each league playing one another in the final. Their schedule of 2 games in the weeks leading up to the first 2 tasks, followed by the last 2 league matches and the Quidditch final being contested in the run-up to the last task, made perfect sense to everyone in the meeting. Adding that the students themselves would organize and steward the matches too ticked all the boxes. Umbridge was sitting there almost ready to burst with anger. That certainly helped make up the minds of any staff who was still undecided. The Quidditch proposal received a unanimous yes vote. As the meeting ended, Severus found himself being approached by Henrika, her daughter, in her arms. "What did you think of the Marauders Club? I worked with them last year, until this little lady made it impossible to continue. I really wouldn't know where to start, watching students just beginning second year. Yet being able to cast shields was only one of the surprises. I think what first struck me when Harry started with the Crows was how careful they were not to let house barriers carry over into their club. Each team was always a mixture of houses, and even sexes. It's paid dividends throughout the school. Watching Draco and Pansy work with the Weasley twins is something that will take a while to fully accept what my eyes are telling me. Draco, Pansy, Hannah and Morag take over the running of that club next year. This was an idea that started because of Dumbledore's latest disaster of a defense professor. It's now something they want to see continued for generations to come. It's something I hope is still running when Astrid and Jamie come to Hogwarts. Living under Gringotts, it would be hard not to know the Jamie Henrika was referring would be Jamie Granger, that Miss Granger's parents had chosen to have their son being born in Gringotts, rather than St. Mungo's, or some Muggle medical facility, was looked upon as another plus sign in their admiration of Miss Granger. a witch they'd taken to their hearts. She had made as much of an impact on goblin culture as her mate had on the wizarding version. Given that Harry had that whole boy who lived thing of a head start, Hermione's popularity was a quite remarkable achievement. I don't know how long I'll actually be teaching in Hogwarts, but it's a program I'm happy to be associated with as long as I'm here. Two men who refuse to admit they're just happy to spend some time with their godsons, you and Sirius, are more alike than either of you would care to admit. Once more there was no malice in Severus's words. Lady Black, I see no for you to be insulting. Emreka's musical laugh further infuriated an already livid Dolores. Seeing this beautiful witch, standing there with a baby in her arms, and she had a pure-blood lord for a husband, did something to Dolores's insides. Whether or not it was jealousy didn't really matter. Her mind was now set on its path, the one to Hogsmeade that is. Dolores would be looking for a rock to hide her report under this Saturday. When you had creatures breeding with pure bloods, and werewolves as professors, it was time to take some action. The fact she wouldn't actually have to meet with Estrange was certainly a bonus. Dolores was sure the Dark Lord would be most interested in how a former Death Eater had managed to enter the new Hogwarts wards. Ooh! Hermione was worried. Today was her birthday, and Harry hadn't mentioned it at all. The chances of him having forgotten about her special day were nil, leaving Hermione to think he was planning something. And that's what had her worried. Being a goblin, Harry considered a person's birthday to be their most important day of the year. As she was the most important person in the world to her mate, there was no telling what Harry had up his sleeve by way of a surprise. Meeting Padma first, Hermione was greeted with a hug, kiss, and best wishes for a happy birthday. Her best friend would certainly be in on anything Harry had planned. But Padma was very good at keeping secrets. Padma easily read the worry in Hermione and tried to put her mind at rest. Trust me, Hermione, you'll love it. Now let's not keep our men waiting. They made their way down the stairs to the Ravenclaw common room where Padma then made herself scarce so the waiting Harry could wish Hermione a proper happy birthday. It was a good 10 minutes later when the two couples met at the main doors, Neville offering a now ruffled but smiling Hermione best birthday wishes before the quartet set off for their morning run. The girls were running in front, Padma trying not to giggle at the wide smile Hermione was wearing. So, getting kissed as a 15-year-old is apparently a lot better than when you're 14. May can't come quickly enough if I'm gonna feel like that. I don't need gifts or whatever Harry has planned for today, just him waiting for me in the morning is all I'll ever need. I know that. And so does Harry. That's why he goes all out to make your birthday special. You will love it. Just play along and do what he says. Doing what she was asked found Hermione getting dressed smart, but casual. They had just finished potions where Master Pitsley had given her a rare book on the subject as a birthday gift. After receiving presents from friends all day, Hermione was actually relieved Harry appeared to be taking her out of the castle tonight. When Tonks appeared dressed similarly with Tonks, you were never sure what she was going to wear. Here was further confirmation of her theory. If they were leaving the castle, then Tonks would certainly be coming too. Arriving in Gringotts by Harry's portkey saw them being greeted by Father, Hermione dispensing her usual hugs on the ambassador. She was somewhat surprised to discover that was not their final destination, but totally shocked when they next visited the Grangers' house in Crawley. As Harry led her outside, Hermione thought it was time for some answers. Harry, I've been a good little girlfriend and played along with everything you've asked. I think we're way past the stage, however, where I should be getting some answers. Well, we're having a bit of a party for you tonight, and then an even bigger party tomorrow. We're going to collect the guest of honor and take him to Kingassy with us. Harry, you're not making sense. No one in Crawley can know I'm a witch. Hermione stopped as one name flashed into her head. Harry's smile told her she got it right. We're taking the Reverend Richards to Kingassy. He'll be at your party tonight. And tomorrow we'll christen our baby brother. I hope you don't mind. We thought that by combining both events we could all spend the weekend together. Harry never got to say any more as Hermione was now showing she didn't mind at all. By kissing him, Robert Richards was as giddy as a schoolboy at the mere thought of spending his weekend with people who could perform magic. He was trying not to think in terms of witches and wizards, To say they received negative press in the book he lived his life by would be an understatement. Having known the Grangers for many years, he'd christened a baby Hermione too. Robert intended to look on Dan and Emma's children as having special abilities. That those abilities could apparently transport him from Crawley to Kingassy in a moment was something he was really looking forward to experiencing. He had always been a person that questioned everything, even his faith. Robert thought that if his faith couldn't stand up to his questions, then it wasn't really something that he could live his life by. He firmly believed that every person on the planet were God's children, and his mission was to minister to them to the best of his abilities. There was also the fact that had he not learned of the magical community, he would certainly have christened little Jamie Granger in the church anyway. His excitement was there for all three to see as Hermione made the introductions, though introducing Tonks as Harry's ministerial protection detail raised his eyebrows. Harry and Hermione each took one of the Reverend's arms while Tonks lifted his bag before Harry activated their emergency port keys, knowing they would take all of them straight to Kingassy. As his eyes were screwed tightly shut, it was left to a giggling Hermione to tell the Reverend Richards they'd arrived. His eyes were soon open wide as Harry had led them from the training room to their ballroom, a ballroom full of people shouting "Happy Birthday, Hermione." The people who had already seen Hermione earlier in the day were standing back and letting those who hadn't greet her first. Dan and Emma were at the head of the queue. After greeting his daughter, Dan moved on to the bewildered Reverend and took him under his wing. "Welcome to Kingassy. How was the trip? I feel as if I've just entered a different world. I'm assuming this is why we haven't seen you in Crawley." "It's the same world, Robert, just different people." That little man now hugging Hermione is Harry's adoptive father. "He may be a goblin, but he's one of the most honorable people I've ever met. Neither he nor his son have religion in their lives, but their code of ethics that they live those lives by are certainly values Emma and I can support." They both adore Hermione and just look at Harry with Jamie. "It's barely been 3 weeks yet. You think our boys hadn't seen each other for months?" Robert watched as a little creature barely the height of Hermione's waist, but certainly not a goblin, hugged the girl before disappearing with 2 swords he didn't even know the teens had on them. There was then a group of goblin children who greeted the birthday girl, generating a lot of excitement on both sides. Emma arrived and explained those children actually lived on the estate, and really looked up to Hermione and Harry in more than just the obvious way. They were all delighted to be invited, but watching Hermione's smile told everyone there that Harry had gotten it right. Robert could really only compare this to some sort of medieval banquet, with Harry and Hermione sitting at the head of the enormous table like the kings and queens of old. The food, though, was as good as any he'd ever eaten, and the wine certainly a lot better than Robert was used to. What pleased him, though, was how genuinely happy everyone seemed to be, just by being here. There were clearly a wide range of ages involved, from grandmothers to babies, and also different cultures too. Everyone, though, was getting along and having fun. No one was here just to be seen. Emma had finally managed to prise her baby son off the 2 teens, and introduce him to Robert, saying that they were already sure Jamie was magical too. The Reverend Richards looked at this beautiful child and could see no reason why he shouldn't christen the baby tomorrow. He may do so in front of the strangest congregation he'd ever faced, but the baby was still a baby, albeit a magical one. Hermione thought dancing with Harry was simply magical. "I can't believe you managed to do all this and keep it a secret from me. The amount of people who must have known." All their friends and family were here. The Marauder trainers, the Potter scholars, their Ravenclaw yearmates, and even the children and their parents from the Glen. Bill, Percy and Penny had also been invited. Bill would still be taking them for their lesson in the morning. That Bill was currently dancing with Jenny Abercrombie. Raised no eyebrows in this company. Harry knew the young mother would be missing Ewan and gave both of them this opportunity to catch up over the weekend. "They all knew how much it meant to me to make this a surprise. No one was going to say anything. Now I still haven't given you your gift." "Harry, you've already spoiled me. I don't need any more. Just having you is all I'll ever need." "Well, that's good, since that's your birthday present. How does Saturday the 4th of August, 1996 sound?" "Like a long way away. What's so special about that day?" I intended to see the Reverend Richards and inquire if we could book his services for that day. Since it's going to be our wedding day, I thought I should at least ask you about it first." Again Hermione stopped Harry talking by kissing him, this time with even more passion. Apparently she only thought she was happy before. Hermione now felt as if she could fly to the moon unaided. "I take it that's a yes then. I need to speak to Dan and the Reverend Richards. You just have to pick your bridesmaids. Padma, Luna and Sapphire. Something tells me you've already thought about this. Can you hold off speaking with them until tomorrow? I need to talk to Padma first. I want to give her and Neville the option of making it a double wedding. Would that be okay with you?" "Hermione, even if they don't want to make that decision before tomorrow, they can make it a double wedding any time, up until the day of the ceremony. I don't think we can have our best man and chief bridesmaid suddenly asking the Reverend if he could marry them too." As Neville and Padma were dancing past, Harry smoothly switched partners, so they could pass this information on to their best friends. When the couples were reunited for the next dance, Padma and Neville had lots to talk about. The ballroom was now full of chairs, all lined up facing the ceremony that was about to take place at the end of the room. The Reverend had been somewhat shocked to see the baptismal font from his own church sitting there. Dan had to reassure Robert it would be returned to Crawley directly after the service. Barchoke was sitting beside his children, Luna and Sapphire, as he watched the ceremony before him unfold. He thought it was simple yet beautiful ceremony, one where Neville and Padma were very happy to promise to play a prominent role in Jamie's life. With his own role now changed from that of banker, the ambassador couldn't help but be amazed at the political statements being made here today. He was well aware that thought had never crossed Dan and Emma's minds, which made this occasion all the more remarkable. A wizard born inside Gringotts to Muggle parents was just christened by a Muggle, with two teens of old pure-blood families standing as godparents. Add in the Minister of Magic and the Director sitting in the audience, and you couldn't help but see the political significance here. Harry had certainly brought all three cultures closer together, but his baby brother was already continuing that trend. The fine September day had allowed the elves to set the reception that would follow on the lawn, as it had allowed his assistant ambassador to give his lesson outside. The warded area had drawn quite the crowd by the time they had finished, the four older wizards also taking part in the session. Some of the guests had begun arriving, and Amos Diggory was almost bursting with pride as he caught the end of the lesson. The reception afterwards was also a big hit. Barchoke had trouble believing his eyes as Rainier cradled Jamie in the crook of her arm. Ragnarok's next move totally floored the entire family, at least those who understood the significance of what was happening here. Our research concluded that it was traditional to bring a christening gift. It also said that gift should be silver. I hope this meets that criteria. When Emma opened the box to see the exquisite silver baby bangle, Harry, Hermione and Ragnarok, all giving deep bows, told her there was more going on here than she realized. "It's beautiful, but obviously has more significance than being a simple bangle. Anyone care to fill us poor dentists in on what's really happening here?" "Mum, the design of Hermione's bracelet signifies she's under my family's protection, as does Amelia's brooch. That bangle is the director's family design, and places Jamie under that family's protection. It is a great honor, one that every goblin will instantly recognize." Rainier still had a smiling Jamie in her arms. The youngest Granger was loving all the attention he was receiving today. "This beautiful baby has already broken so many barriers. We hope he'll grow up in a world where those same barriers are consigned to history. He will be raised in an environment where magical, muggle or goblin are merely words, not distinctions which define who we are. How could we not offer our support to that?" The Reverend Richards had stuck close to Dan all day. Hearing that, though, squared away any lingering doubts his conscience was having about this matter. Here was the key that unlocked his continued support of these people. That everyone had come to Kintossee to support this child, wishing for him to grow up in an environment that was based on love and rejected hate, was certainly something his beliefs could relate to. This was probably just as well as he found himself agreeing to a few more engagements in Kintossee before the day was out. Harry, though he'd had all the shocks he could handle for one day, that was until a nervous Remus approached him, with a beaming Tonks on his arm. "Harry, I was wondering, sorry, We were wondering if we could ask you a favor. Ask away, Remus. Well, we were going to talk to Reverend Richards and then thought about locations. He was interrupted by his impatient fiancée. What Wolfie here is trying to ask is, can we get married in King Usse at Christmas? If you say yes, we can ask the Reverend today. I think that would be wonderful. Of course you have my permission. Harry couldn't say any more as Tonks took a leaf out of Hermione's book and kissed him into silence. She then dragged Remus away before Harry even got time to shake his hand. It would appear Tonks wanted this matter settled before her fiancé could change his mind. A laughing Hermione approached Harry with Luna and Sapphire. Looking pretty flustered there, Harry. Should I be worried? I just agreed we'd hold a wedding here at Christmas. Does that worry you? Tonks has just dragged Remus off to check on the Reverend's availability, something we need to do too. Hermione was receiving shocked looks from her two friends at Harry's last comment, so just went for it. I hope you two will be my bridesmaids. We're just waiting on Padma reaching a decision before we start making our own arrangements. At that, a very happy couple rushed over and was soon embracing everyone. Our parents agreed. We want to take you up on your offer. Neville could hardly contain his excitement. Gran pointed out that as Orders of Merlin holders we were already of age, and we were only bringing the date forward by a year. After that they all agreed. The four set off to find the Reverend before the happy news spread around the entire reception. The news exciting those leaving Master Pitsley's potions lesson wasn't about the imminent arrival of the two schools. The girls were far more interested in Ron Weasley asking Lavender to tomorrow night's Merlin ball. Their group was actually the last to arrive, where everyone had gathered as a school welcoming committee. Harry having point-blank refused to cut their potions lesson short, just for this. Padma wasn't pleased to be standing here either. What's the big deal about this? We've all seen people at Porrit or Portkey before. This saw Harry shaking his head. I don't think that's how they'll be traveling, Padma. Hogwarts has made no provisions to house guests. That means they must be bringing their accommodation with them. I can't see tents being suitable for winter in the Scottish Highlands. This led to a few involuntary shivers. It was cold enough inside the castle in winter, no one even wanted to contemplate living outside under canvas. Cries going up from those nearer the front focused everyone's attention in the direction they were now pointing. Flying over the forbidden forest toward the castle were 12 enormous winged palomino horses, pulling a powder blue carriage that was at least the size of a large house. It approached at great speed before landing in front of cheering students. When the first person exited the carriage, it was soon clear why the structure needed to be the size it was. She was dressed from head to toe in black satin, with many magnificent opals gleaming around her neck. That wasn't what first caught your attention though. This lady was at least as tall as Hagrid. She was approached by Augusta and Minerva, who both seemed pleased to her. Madame Maximo, a warm welcome to Hogwarts to you and your students. Augusta, Minerva, how are you both? If sis is warm, I dread your winter. As eyes as here yet. Seeing about 15 French students shivering in their thin robes, Minerva made a suggestion. Not yet, Olympi. Why don't you take your students into the castle where it's warmer? But Zirus, Hagrid practically bowed people out of his path as he rushed straight for this vision. Don't you worry your pretty little head about that. I'll look after those magnificent horses. Olymp's dark eyes were locked on those of Hagrid. My horses only drink Singer malt whiskey. Well, they'll enjoy their stay here. Scotland invented their drink. Padma was giggling as the French students followed their headmistress into the castle. Harry, you might need to ask Hogwarts to make the dance floor bigger for tomorrow's ball. I think we may have just spotted Hogwarts' newest couple. Now, with some idea of what to expect, keen eyes were watching to spot the Bulgarians arriving. Those eyes were soon drawn to the Black Lake. Large bubbles started appearing in the still, dark water. Soon there were waves lapping against the shore. A gurgling sound preceded a whirlpool appearing in the lake. It was like someone had pulled the plug out of a giant bathtub, except this one now had a pole sticking out of it. As more of the structure was revealed, all those waiting could now see it was a sailing ship. As the ship made its way to the shore, the anchor had barely splashed into the lake when a gangplank made the connection from ship to shore. Neville was not alone in expressing his opinion. The Bulgarians' arrival was cool. They were also a lot more prepared for the Scottish Highland weather with cloaks that had thick fur collars. This may have masked their features, but there was no mistaking the figure leading them toward the castle. The students of Durmstrang were being triumphantly led into Hogwarts by someone they all instantly recognized, Albus Dumbledore.